Ethiopia just shocked the world. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has announced a nuclear deal that could change Africa's future forever. Until now, powerful nations decided who could access advanced technology. But Ethiopia has broken that rule. This isn't about weapons. It's about energy, dignity, and independence. Less than half of Ethiopia's 120 million citizens have reliable electricity. Nuclear power promises something different. Reliable energy, immune to droughts and free from
አቶሚክ ኃይል ተቆጣጣሪ ኤጀንሲ ኢትዮጵያ የኒውክሌር ቴክኖሎጂን ለሰላማዊ ዓላማ ለመጠቀም የጀመረው
Brothers and sisters, what you are about to hear is not a rumor. It is not speculation. It is the truth the West has been trying to bury under fear, propaganda, and intimidation. Ethiopia, the land of ancient kingdoms and unbreakable spirit, has just signed a nuclear energy deal with Russia, and with the stroke of a pen, history has shifted. The balance of power has tilted, and America is trembling like never before. For decades, Washington treated Africa as its backyard, a place for raw materials, for cheap labor, for military experiments, for exploitation dressed as aid. They told us we were too poor, too weak, too unstable to control the atom. They said nuclear power was the exclusive privilege of Western nations and their allies. They laughed at the idea of an African country mastering nuclear technology. They believed that Africa would always remain a consumer, never a creator, always a follower, never a leader. But today, Ethiopia has shattered that illusion. Ethiopia has done what the United States swore could never happen, entered the nuclear age on its own terms, with its own allies, under its own control. And the empire is terrified because it knows what this means. It means the monopoly on power is gone. It means the West can no longer dictate the terms of our future. It means Africa has dared to step into the realm they have always kept for themselves. Listen carefully. This deal is not just about electricity. It is about liberation. For the first time, Africa is not asking permission. For the first time, Africa is not playing by the rules of Washington or Paris. For the first time, Africa has broken through the ceiling of limitations imposed by foreign powers. Ethiopia is not just building reactors, it is building a new era, and America knows it. That is why think tanks in Washington are panicking. That is why U.S. generals are whispering behind closed doors. That is why Western media is screaming words like danger, destabilization, and security threat. They are not afraid of Ethiopia's failure, they are afraid of Ethiopia's success. Because success spreads, success inspires, success multiplies. If Ethiopia can do it, why not Nigeria? Why not Ghana? Why not Egypt? Why not South Africa, Kenya, Algeria, Mali? One success becomes a spark, and that spark becomes a fire that no amount of sanctions, no amount of pressure, no amount of propaganda can extinguish. And here lies the greatest fear of the United States, that Africa, united by ambition and armed with technology, will rise beyond control. Because once Africa controls energy, Africa controls industry. Once Africa controls industry, Africa controls its destiny. Once Africa controls its destiny, America loses its grip, and when America loses its grip, the empire begins to collapse. This is why Washington is terrified. This is why they call Ethiopia's nuclear deal dangerous. Not because of what it will destroy, but because of what it will create: independence, prosperity, and sovereignty. The very things they swore Africa should never have. Make no mistake, brothers and sisters, this is not just a deal. This is a declaration that Africa refuses to be bound by the chains of dependency. A declaration that we will not remain in the dark while others live in light. A declaration that Africa will not be dictated to, managed, or manipulated. Ethiopia has lit the fuse, and the explosion will be felt not just in Washington, but across the entire globe. America is furious, Europe is nervous, but Africa is ready. So tonight I tell you this: the age of Western dominance is ending. The age of African power is beginning. And Ethiopia has just sounded the trumpet that will echo through history. That is why the United States trembles. That is why the empire shakes. And that is why this nuclear deal is not just a contract, it is a revolution. Brothers and sisters of Africa, children of a continent that has always stood as the cradle of humanity, let us pause for a moment and absorb the seismic shift that has just occurred. Ethiopia, a nation that has stood tall through centuries of struggle, has signed a nuclear deal with Russia. A deal so bold, so transformative, so defiant of the old order that it has sent tremors from Washington to Brussels, from Wall Street to the Pentagon. The United States, long accustomed to dictating the tempo of world politics, is now reeling in fear, and make no mistake, this fear is not just about nuclear energy. This fear is about power, sovereignty, and the unraveling of an empire's grip on Africa. Ethiopia has chosen to step onto the stage of nations not as a spectator but as an actor, not as a pawn but as a player. For decades, the United States saw Africa as a field to be plundered, a market to be manipulated, a landscape where it could impose its will with aid, sanctions, or force. But now, Africa has flipped the script. Ethiopia, standing tall as the fortress of resistance against colonialism, has dared to say, "We will chart our own course." And in Russia, Ethiopia has found not just a partner, but a counterweight to American arrogance. Why is America terrified? Because this deal tears apart the illusion that Africa must remain in technological backwardness, chained to outdated systems, begging for handouts from the West. Nuclear energy is not just about electricity. It is about prestige. It is about industrial capacity. It is about a nation declaring to the world that it has joined the ranks of those who decide their destiny. The United States cannot stand the sight of an African nation harnessing nuclear power with the help of a rival power like Russia. To Washington, this is not just Ethiopia's progress, it is America's humiliation. Think of what this means for Ethiopia. With nuclear power, Ethiopia will no longer beg for energy loans from the IMF or the World Bank. With nuclear technology, Ethiopia will no longer be crippled by shortages or forced to accept overpriced energy imports. With nuclear plants, Ethiopia will power industries, light cities, and electrify rural villages that the world once dismissed as unworthy of modern progress. And with Russia as its partner, Ethiopia has sidestepped the Western chokehold. This is why America is trembling. Let us go deeper. America's fear lies not only in Ethiopia's advancement but in the precedent it sets. If Ethiopia can do this, why not Nigeria? Why not South Africa? Why not Ghana or Burkina Faso? Why not the entire African Union declaring with one voice that it will pursue nuclear technology free from American dictates? The United States knows that Ethiopia's decision has opened the door, and once that door is open, Africa will march through it with pride, power, and unity. The West has always played a dangerous game. Keep Africa dependent, keep Africa begging, keep Africa behind. That way, Western corporations can dominate, Western governments can dictate, and Western militaries can intervene at will. But the nuclear deal between Ethiopia and Russia has shattered that game. It is no longer Washington writing Africa's future. It is Africa, with new partners, writing its own. Now let us examine the global chessboard. America sees nuclear cooperation between Russia and Ethiopia not only as a technological leap but as a geopolitical earthquake. Washington has long worked to isolate Russia, sanction its economy, weaken its alliances. But here comes Africa, refusing to bow, refusing to isolate, refusing to become another weapon in America's crusade. Ethiopia has said, in essence, "We will not be America's pawn," and that declaration carries a message far beyond Addis Ababa. It is a message to Africa and to the world. We will choose our friends, and we will decide our destiny. The Pentagon is nervous because it knows that nuclear technology, even when intended for peaceful energy, carries immense symbolic weight. A nation with nuclear reactors commands respect. A nation that controls the atom is no longer treated as a playground for imperial powers. America fears that Ethiopia, empowered by this deal, will become a magnet for other African states seeking to escape U.S. dominance. And once the dominoes start falling, America's empire in Africa will crumble faster than it ever imagined. This deal is not about war. Ethiopia has made clear that its nuclear ambition is peaceful, but peace itself terrifies Washington. Because when Africa can power its own industries, when Africa can fuel its own growth, when Africa can build modernity without American chains, then America loses the one weapon it has always used: dependency. A self-sufficient Africa is America's greatest nightmare. Let us not forget history. Ethiopia is no stranger to defiance. It was Ethiopia that stood against the Italian invasion and emerged victorious at Adwa, shocking the colonial powers of Europe. It was Ethiopia that stood as a beacon of independence while the rest of Africa was carved up like a feast. And now it is Ethiopia again, defying the empire of our age, showing the world that Africa will not bow. This nuclear deal is not just a contract, it is a declaration of independence for the 21st century. America, of course, will not sit quietly. It will attempt to sabotage. It will attempt to pressure. It will attempt to bribe. Already, Washington whispers threats of sanctions, of aid cuts, of diplomatic isolation. But what America does not understand is that the world has changed. Ethiopia is not alone. Russia is with Ethiopia. China is with Ethiopia. Africa is awakening, and it will not abandon Ethiopia. The days when a single U.S. threat could paralyze a nation are over, and so we must ask ourselves, what does this mean for Africa? It means that the chains of dependence are breaking. It means that the lie of African weakness is exposed. It means that from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, from Cairo to Cape Town, a new vision is rising. An Africa that will control its resources, master its technology, and dictate its own path. This is why America is terrified, because Ethiopia has shown that the empire is not invincible. Ethiopia has proven that Africa can rise without America, with partners who do not demand submission but offer respect. Ethiopia has lit a torch, and that torch will spread across the continent, igniting a fire that no empire can extinguish. Brothers and sisters, the hour is here. The old world order is crumbling. America's grip on Africa is slipping, and Ethiopia, with courage and conviction, has struck the blow that will be remembered in history as the beginning of Africa's nuclear age. Let the world take note. Africa is no longer the beggar. Africa is the power. Africa is the future. Ethiopia's nuclear deal with Russia is not just an agreement signed on paper, it is a living symbol of resistance, a blow struck against the hypocrisy of an empire that has long claimed to be the guardian of freedom while suffocating others with control. America looks at Ethiopia today and sees something it has never wanted to see: an African nation refusing to bow. An African nation refusing to compromise its destiny, an African nation building alliances that bypass the Western gatekeepers of power. This nuclear partnership between Addis Ababa and Moscow has shattered the illusion that Africa must forever remain a junior partner in world affairs. It has announced in no uncertain terms that Africa will no longer wait for permission to pursue greatness. Washington's fear is not rooted in nuclear reactors alone. No, the fear runs deeper. It is the fear of losing the narrative. For decades, America has wrapped Africa in stories of poverty, crisis, and dependence. But now Ethiopia, through this deal, has written a new story. A story of ambition, sovereignty, and daring. A story where Africa is not waiting for aid but forging power. A story where the U.S. is no longer the hero but the outsider. This is what terrifies America, because narratives build empires. Narratives sustain control. Narratives convince the world who is master and who is servant, and Ethiopia's nuclear deal has cracked that narrative like glass shattering under pressure. Let us pause and imagine the landscape 10 years from now. Ethiopia, with its nuclear plants up and running, powering industries, lighting villages, fueling factories. No more power outages crippling businesses. No more foreign corporations dictating the price of energy. Instead, Ethiopia exporting electricity to neighbors, transforming itself into a regional powerhouse, while Washington watches from the sidelines, helpless, its leverage evaporating. Think of the domino effect. Nigeria sees Ethiopia's rise and says, "Why not us?" South Africa, already capable of nuclear research, deepens ties with Russia or China, declaring its energy sovereignty. Ghana, Senegal, Kenya, one by one, African states step forward to claim nuclear technology for peaceful development. Soon the U.S. strategy of keeping Africa dependent collapses like a house of cards. This is why the U.S. establishment is scrambling in panic. It is not because of one deal, but because of what it represents, the beginning of the end of America's monopoly over Africa's destiny. Washington fears that Africa is no longer listening to its sermons about democracy while ignoring its hypocrisy. Africa is no longer kneeling for loans while paying back with resources. Africa is no longer trapped in dependency, and it all begins with Ethiopia's refusal to bend. Brothers and sisters, let us remember that the nuclear deal is not merely economic, it is profoundly symbolic. It is a declaration that Africa is capable of mastering the most sophisticated technologies on Earth. For years, the West has spread the poisonous lie that Africans cannot be trusted with such power, that nuclear technology is too dangerous for this continent, that only Europe, America, or a handful of approved nations can wield it. But Ethiopia has crushed that lie. Ethiopia has declared, Africa can handle the atom, Africa can handle the future, Africa will not be locked out of the gates of modernity. And now, the U.S. faces a choice it never wanted to face. It can try to sanction Ethiopia into submission, but sanctions will fail. It can try to isolate Ethiopia diplomatically, but isolation will not work because Africa is rallying and new partners stand ready. It can try to destabilize Ethiopia internally, stirring divisions, financing unrest. But even if it tries, Ethiopia has shown time and again from Adwa to the present that it is a fortress of resilience. The people of Ethiopia, like the people of Africa, will not yield. The terror that grips Washington is also rooted in its own weakness. The U.S. is overstretched, drowning in debt, struggling to maintain influence in Latin America, losing ground in Asia, and now bleeding credibility in Africa. For years, America thought it could juggle wars abroad while keeping Africa silent with handouts. But this deal has shown the world that Africa is not silent. Africa is speaking, and its voice is louder than ever. Let us now ask, why Russia? Why did Ethiopia choose Russia, and why does that choice sting the U.S. so deeply? Because Russia offers partnership where the U.S. offered patronage. Russia offers respect where the U.S. offered lectures. Russia offers technology where the U.S. offered conditional aid. Ethiopia chose Russia not because it seeks confrontation, but because it seeks dignity, and dignity is something America never wanted to give. Washington expected Africa to remain trapped in the post-Cold War order, where America was the sole superpower and every nation was forced to obey. But Ethiopia has shown that we are now in a multipolar world, where alliances are diverse, where nations are free to choose, and where Africa is no longer bound to a single master. This deal is proof that America's monopoly on influence is over. Now, think of the psychological impact. When American leaders wake up and see Ethiopia shaking hands with Moscow over nuclear energy, they see the ghost of an empire slipping away. They see the death of the illusion that Africa is America's backyard. They see, in Ethiopia's courage, the spark that could ignite a continent-wide rebellion against Western domination. This fear explains why American media outlets have already begun smearing Ethiopia's government, painting the deal as reckless, dangerous, destabilizing. They cannot admit the truth that Ethiopia is simply choosing progress. Instead, they demonize. But demonization is the language of a frightened empire, not a confident one. Brothers and sisters, let us be clear. This deal does not just empower Ethiopia. It empowers Africa, because every African who sees Ethiopia rising will know, we are capable, we are deserving, we are powerful. No longer will Africa accept the lie that our role is only to supply raw materials while others enjoy the fruits of technology. Ethiopia has broken that curse, and Africa will follow, and America knows it. That is why Washington is desperate. That is why it trembles. That is why it lashes out. Because Ethiopia has exposed America's weakness and Africa's strength. So let us declare, with no hesitation, Africa will never go back to chains. The nuclear deal is not the end, it is the beginning. It is the first step in Africa's journey toward total independence, technological, economic, political. It is the first crack in the walls of empire, and soon those walls will collapse entirely. The empire is falling, and Ethiopia has pushed the stone that set the avalanche in motion. Brothers and sisters, the future is here. The question is not whether Africa will rise, the question is how fast, how boldly, how united we will rise. America fears the answer, but Africa embraces it. Ethiopia has lit the torch, let us carry it forward until every African nation shines with the light of sovereignty. Let us end this message with the clarity of thunder. Ethiopia's nuclear deal with Russia is not just a contract, it is a revolution. It is a declaration to the world that Africa will no longer be contained, no longer be dictated to, no longer be underestimated. America is terrified not because Ethiopia is weak, but because Ethiopia has shown strength. Terrified not because Ethiopia is reckless, but because Ethiopia is calculated, bold, and strategic. Terrified not because Africa is failing, but because Africa is finally winning. Think about this. For centuries, the US and its allies built their power by telling Africa what it could and could not do. They said Africa could grow crops, but not refine uranium. Africa could dig mines, but not process minerals. Africa could host military bases, but not build nuclear reactors. Africa could sell raw goods, but never manufacture power. And now Ethiopia has said, enough. We are not children to be lectured. We are a civilization, ancient and unbroken, capable of mastering the atom itself. This is why Washington trembles, because once the illusion of dependency is broken in one country, it spreads like wildfire. If Ethiopia can do it, why not Nigeria? Why not Egypt? Why not Ghana, South Africa, Algeria, Kenya, Mali, Senegal? Why not the entire continent? America knows this. That is why it is scrambling to stop the unstoppable. That is why its think tanks, its lobbyists, its media are crying out in alarm. They see the tide turning. They see the empire crumbling. And they know the age of control is ending. But brothers and sisters, this is bigger than Ethiopia, bigger than Russia, bigger than one deal. This is about Africa finally walking into its destiny. The nuclear deal is not the finish line, it is the starting gun. It is the moment history will look back on and say, here, Africa stopped crawling and began to sprint. And I say this clearly, there is no going back. The US cannot reverse this. Sanctions will not stop it. Threats will not stop it. Lies will not stop it. Because you cannot stop a people who have awakened to their own power. You cannot stop a continent that has realized its worth. You cannot stop Africa when Africa is united, determined, and unafraid. Ethiopia has set the example. Russia has opened the door, and Africa has entered a new era. An era where we no longer ask for permission, but seize opportunity. An era where we no longer beg, but build. An era where we no longer survive, but thrive. Let the U.S. tremble. Let the empire rage. It does not matter. The future has already been written, and it is written in Africa's favor. Ethiopia's nuclear deal is not just about energy, it is about dignity. It is about sovereignty. It is about rewriting history. and history will remember that when the world doubted Africa, Africa rose. When the world tried to chain Africa, Africa broke free. When the world tried to silence Africa, Africa roared louder than ever before. So let us leave this place with fire in our hearts and steel in our voices. Let us say to the world, Africa will not bow. Africa will not break. Africa will not wait. Ethiopia has lit the torch. Africa will carry it. And together we will build a future so powerful, so undeniable, so unstoppable, that even the greatest empire on earth will be forced to admit, Africa has risen, and Africa cannot be defeated. Brothers and sisters, the age of American dominance in Africa is over. The age of African sovereignty has begun, and that is why Ethiopia's nuclear deal terrifies the United States. Because it is the sound of an empire dying and a continent finally, gloriously, alive.